The Japanese officer stomped hard, and the Korean soldiers under the wooden planks started running like crazy. Even though it was pouring with rain, they still had to safely send the Japanese soldiers back to the camp. These Korean soldiers who were forcefully conscripted into the Japanese army not only had to charge to their deaths at the forefront, but also had to suffer the humiliation from the Japanese soldiers. Yet the Korean soldiers didn't dare to resist. They could only endure it until the Battle of Kokon-Gol broke out in 1939. Their chance for revenge finally came. The Japanese army provoked the Soviet Union in the Outer Mongolia region. The Soviet Union immediately dispatched 500 tanks to encircle and annihilate the Japanese army. Countless shells rained down. The Japanese soldiers in the front were instantly blown up. The Japanese army could only send out a suicide squad, driving trucks tied with gasoline barrels to crash into the tanks. This kind of suicidal attack completely enraged the Soviet Union. More Soviet tanks charged onto the battlefield. The Japanese army sent out the suicide squad again, tying bombs and crawling under the tanks. But this couldn't change the battlefield situation at all. Looking at the Soviet tanks constantly joining the battlefield, the Japanese army had to surrender. According to incomplete statistics, 600,000 Japanese and Korean soldiers were captured. The Soviet Union loaded them onto trains and sent them to the prisoner of war camps in Siberia, a bitterly cold place. In this weather of minus 40 degrees Celsius, the Japanese soldiers not only had to endure the revenge from the Korean soldiers, but also feel the meticulous care from the Soviet Union. Since there were so many prisoners, the Japanese soldiers had to cut down trees and build houses by themselves. For the convenience of management, the Soviet Union promoted the Korean soldiers who had been insulted by the Japanese army before to be foremen, urging the Japanese soldiers to work. The Korean soldiers who had endured humiliation for 30 years suddenly got the upper hand and immediately vented all their anger on the Japanese soldiers. The Japanese army officer begged desperately for mercy, having long lost his former arrogance, but the Japanese army officer still wasn't convinced. He launched a riot in the dormitory until the Soviet officer showed up and stopped it. He pulled out his saber and stuck it into the ground, ordering them to fight until one of them was dead. The Japanese army officer was no match at all and was beaten black and blue by the Korean soldiers. But in the end, the Korean soldiers couldn't bring themselves to kill the Japanese army officer. As punishment, the two of them were tied up with their hands behind their backs and hung in the snowy field. But this was just the beginning. The Japanese soldiers' nightmare was still to come. The Soviet soldiers threw the military uniforms to the Japanese soldiers, then dragged them to the frontline battlefield, letting them use their lives to consume the German bullets. 10 of them had to share one gun, and they shouted as they charged towards the German position. However, the German army had already been waiting in full battle readiness. What awaited them would be merciless bullets.